throughout North America and right around the world, opponents to vaccine mandates have been ramping up their protests.
But what are the rules here in Canada specifically? What are your rights and your employer's rights? Joining us now is employment lawyer Alex Lucifero. All right, months ago, Alex, talk of vaccine mandates, kind of abstract. Now they are beginning to roll out in practice. It's become a very heated debate. Give us the basics. What are an employee's rights versus an employer?
Well, this issue requires a balancing and a weighing of rights on both sides of the equation, as you mentioned. On the one hand, we have an employer who, by law, has to maintain health and safety in the workplace. So certainly there's an argument on that end of the scale that, imposing a vaccination policy, as we're calling it, is important for the health and safety of employees. On the other end, of course, our employees are asking about their own rights. Their rights to self-determination and civil liberties, and confidentiality is a big one we're hearing of. That's the general playing field. And it's ultimately going to be very, very case and fact specific. Depends on the industry that you're in, depends on whether there's a government mandate in place. Those are the big questions that employees and employment lawyers are asking themselves.
All right, Alex, is there a difference between the rights for unionized employees and those who do not belong to a union if they don't want to get vaccinated?
Yeah, great question. It's one of the fault lines here, and we were seeing a number of fault lines. Again, a big one might be whether there is a government mandate in place for your particular industry. The other fault line, as you mentioned, Jeff, is whether you're unionized or not. If you're a unionized employee, you live and die, so to speak, by your union's position on this issue. Your union as a unionized employee is effectively your one and only legal representative. Unionized employees can't go outside of their union to seek legal advice or legal counsel. So if you are a unionized employee, you need to speak with your union representative about the issue. Some unions are challenging these vaccine mandates and filing grievances. Others are not. And so again, it depends on what your union has to say. If you're a non-unionized employee, you have more options. You have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to these policies.
What about instances of religious exemption or employees who have been advised not to get vaccinated by their doctors for health reasons?
Sure, yeah. So it is important to remember that under our human rights legislation, accommodation is required on the basis of religion and disability or medical exemptions, as you mentioned. There aren't going to be many of these kinds of cases. We've seen on the medical side, for example, there are really only two exemptions, one for an allergic reaction to the vaccine, the other for heart-related issues. But they do exist. These are not just fictitious scenarios. There are individuals who cannot be vaccinated for these reasons, and those employees need to be accommodated in the workplace by law. And if employer acts to brashly in the face of that, they can be looking at potentially a significant amount of damages payable to these employees for violation of their human rights.
All right, Alex, wondering if you are seeing more cases of people suing their employers, and do they have a case here? Do they have some legal standing?
Well, we are. I mean, we've, as an employment law firm, we've received, thousands, literally thousands of calls from employees who are concerned about these policies, and from across the spectrum. I mean, vaccinated employees who are worried about confidentiality and disclosing their medical status. Of course, unvaccinated employees who are worried about losing their jobs over this issue, and that's a real possibility here. A lot of employees are going to be faced with this challenge of having to decide between being vaccinated and losing their jobs. Now, lots of those employees will still be owed severance as a result of that, but you're still putting your job on the line and potentially losing your job. So yes, it's it is the hot topic of the day, Jeff, in employment law, in the employment world, and I imagine it's going to continue to be so for the next several months.
Well, speaking of the jobs and losing them, people are walking away from their jobs, both in Canada and the States. We're seeing what's being called the Great Resignation. How much are the mandates contributing to people walking away from their jobs?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think there's been just kind of in the workplace, a general reassessment since the beginning of COVID as to what employment looks like for a lot of individuals and kind of the pros and cons of particular workplaces and industries. With respect to the mandates specifically, what I would say is I think, even if just 5% of a workforce is unvaccinated. Let's take the federal public service, for example, federal government employees. I think there are about, at least in Ottawa, there are about 125,000 federal government employees in the city. If even just 5% of those decide not to be vaccinated and lose their job as a result, whether that's a resignation or a termination, that is a tremendous amount of people. It's thousands and thousands of people out of a job. I think it's a real issue, and I think we'll ultimately see lots of people losing their jobs on this issue.
All right. And
job as a result, whether that's a resignation or a termination, that is a tremendous amount of people. It's thousands and thousands of people out of a job. I think it's a real issue, and I think we'll ultimately see lots of people losing their jobs on this issue.
all right, an interesting debate, which no doubt will continue. Alex, appreciate this. Thank you so much for the time and the update.
Thank you both for having me.